We are honored today to have Commodore Robert Shafer with us to speak. I saw that. And I have the privilege of being a FAST team program manager in Michigan, and Bob is one of our FAST team reps there. So we have the privilege of knowing each other a bit, and I get to see him more than once a year, but it's still fun every time. I still enjoy it. And he has been back here at Oshkosh many years to do this presentation. I know he tweaks it, he updates it with the new information. He is part of the U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary Assistant, the National Commodore for Recreational Boating Safety. His responsibilities include oversight of all aspects of the U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary RBS programs. Earlier national positions include Assistant National Commodore for Response and Prevention, Director of Response, and Chief of Aviation. Commodore Shafer holds a commercial pilot certificate with ratings for instruments, single and multi-engine airplanes, and helicopters. He's a flight instructor and FAST team representative. He has been trained and certified in aircraft ditching, underwater egress, and survival. He and his wife Susan, who is also a pilot, are proud owners of 2 airplanes and a helicopter. What is really cool is today we also have a presentation at 1 o'clock from a couple of guys who did do a ditching. So they have some experience in this. And it's over in the American Bonanza Society tent. But today, right now, we want to concentrate on what Commodore Shafer has. Come on up here. Let's give him a big hand.
Thank you.
And Bob, we really appreciate the fact that you've come. Here's a certificate of appreciation. And my last parting response for this man who, like I say, I get a chance to work with. He signs his name BS.
There you go. So, I'm just saying, they're my initials and not for nothing. So thanks for coming. And yes, I'd like to, 1 o'clock today in the American Bonanza Society tent, a couple of fellows who actually ditched their airplane and are here to tell you about it. So ditchings are survivable, but it's important to remember that ditching isn't the same thing as crashing. We'll talk about why a little bit. So thanks for coming. We're going to try and talk, if I can make this thing work. If I push the little button, is it supposed to go forward? It doesn't go forward. Oh, it goes backward, forward, sideways. Do I have the right gizmo? Hello, back and forth. We're going to talk about how we manage the risks of flying over water. I probably need to turn it on or what?
I don't know. We'll see.
It's very complicated, this machine. Maybe you should change the slide. Back in the old, remember slides? Yeah. Uh-oh. Did we turn it on? Are we have to think of everything?
Keep talking.
It's very oh, there we go. That's the Oscar November. Is that it?
Yeah.
Oh, there we go. Oh, hey, look at that. It's awesome. Thank you, Gary. I appreciate it. Yeah, I'd have figured it out sooner or later by about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So we're going to talk about managing the risks of flying over water. Now, who in here can tell me the first rule of risk management? Huh? Well, that's a good rule, but it's not the first rule of risk management. Yes? It's up there. Avoid unnecessary risk is the very first thing about risk management. If you don't have to take the risk, don't take it. Okay, and this seems obvious, but apparently it isn't because people take unnecessary risks all the time. Now, if you have to take a risk, do so only when the benefit outweighs the cost. So make sure it's a necessary risk. And when you're going to take one of those risks, you want to do everything you can to reduce the unavoidable part of that risk by reducing your exposure to whatever the hazard may be that causes you to have a risk, the probability, the likelihood that something bad is going to happen, and the severity, the badness. Reduce the badness. So we're going to talk about ways you can do that to reduce the risk and manage the risk, because that's all risk management of flying over water. So avoid unnecessary risk and all that. Now, risk takers, how many folks here have flown over water recently? Anybody here fly over like Lake Michigan to get here? Okay, if you are going to be a risk taker, and flying over water is taking the risk that you're going to wind up in the water, you have 4 basic responsibilities. You have to have a way to alert the search and rescue system that you're in trouble. So you have to have an alerting capability, and that's your job to do that. Nobody can do that for you. So you have to be able to, basically you have to be able to call for help. Help me, I'm in trouble, come get me. Well, then you got to have a way of indicating position. Come get me, well, where? And then you have to have a way of continuously, actively signaling your position, because it may move. Especially if you are in water, you will, on the surface of the water, I hope, or very close to it, you will move because water is a fluid medium, and the winds and waves and currents will cause you to move. So you have to do those 3 things. You have to alert the search and rescue system, you have to be able to indicate your position, and continuously update that position. You also have one more thing you have to do, and that is you have to stay alive long enough to be rescued, not recovered. That's a distinction with a very significant difference. So you have to do whatever it takes to stay alive long enough for someone to get you. How long is it going to take for someone to get you? Well, that depends. We'll talk about that a little bit, but it depends greatly on the position, on those other 3 things, including all that position indication you give. So let's talk about that. Now, the hazard that causes the risk is cold water. The Great Lakes are always cold water, for those of you from around this neck of the woods, but it's not just the Great Lakes. Most of our nation's coastal areas are cold water most of the time. Now, if you get into the southern latitudes, Florida, the Gulf of Mexico, there's times when that's considered cold water, times when it's not, but it's still not going to be exactly bath water most of the time. So that's the hazard, being exposed to that cold water. The consequences of being immersed in cold water can be severe. They can be severe all the way to, well, to being not so alive as you'd like to be anymore. Cold water sucks heat out of your body faster than you can burn sugar and turn it into calories of heat. What that means is you will cool down if you are immersed in cold water long enough, because you can no longer make heat faster than it is escaping your body. And when you cool down sufficiently, the pilot light goes out, you're done, end of discussion. Now we're going to recover you and not rescue you. Water conducts heat about 25 times faster than air of the same temperature. You can stand around, who here has stood around in 50-degree air and survived? Yeah, 50-degree water, not so much. So you have to figure out how to stop heat loss. The rest of your life depends on it, and the rest of your life may be measured in minutes unless you successfully stop the heat loss to that infinite heat sink in which you are now immersed. Sudden immersion in cold water can cause a whole lot of things. It can cause pain. Who here has dipped into a big old bucket of ice water to get out a cold beverage on a hot summer day? And what is your hands? You go, whoo! That zings, right? Yeah, so imagine your whole body dumped into ice water. It can cause an uncontrollable torso reflex gasp. You've all experienced that at one time or another. Ever get in the shower and somebody elsewhere in the house turns on the water or flushes the toilet or something, and you get a blast of cold water? What do? Right? That's that uncontrollable torso reflex gasp. Now, if you're dumped into cold water and you gasp as you are going into the water, it's very likely you're going to suck in a lung full of water and aspirate that and drown. So this is not a good thing. You don't want that to happen to you. Immersion in cold water can cause hyperventilation, and it can cause cardiac arrest. Imagine what it's doing to your circulatory system. It's sort of like having a garden hose and pinching it off. So boom, your blood pressure spikes. If you have a compromised circulatory system, it can cause a cardiac arrest. And this is likely the cause of many sudden disappearances when people fall off of those little floaty things that they go out on boats. That's it. Thank you. I forget. So, by the way, alcohol causes this to be exaggerated for those of you who go out on those floaty things. And because that seems to be what a lot of people do when they go out on boats. They imbibe. This is also another good reason not to drink when you're flying your airplane. I'm just saying. I'm just saying. So there's this little thing we call the 1-10-1 rule, or it's a mnemonic device. Think about it. So the 1-10-1 rule, you've got 1 minute to survive. If you're dumped into cold water, you have 1 minute, a 1 minute threshold you've got to get past. And that, you have to get past that gas reflex, that immediate hyperventilation. You've got to try and control the hyperventilation that may occur, because when you're hyperventilating, you're not filling your lungs full of air. You're not going to be as buoyant as you ought to be because you're taking very rapid, shallow breaths. And you've got to get past the panic. You've got to fight through that. So you've got 1 minute to survive. If you get past that first minute, great. Now you're in the 10-minute window. These, by the way, are concurrent. They're not sequential. So you don't get 1 minute, you get 10 minutes. Now you got 9 more minutes. So now in this next 9 minutes, the 10-minute window, you have to get past the incapacitation that will occur when you're immersed in cold water. What will happen is your body will start shutting down the blood flow to your limbs to preserve the heat in the core of your body, which means your fingers and hands and legs and stuff don't work as well as they used to. Ever been out in cold weather in the wintertime without your gloves? What happens to your fingers and your dexterity? It goes away rapidly. You try to fiddle around with your keys and get them in, and they don't work very good, and because they're cold. Well, imagine that happening to your whole body very rapidly, 25 times faster than being in air of the same temperature. Pretty soon you're not going to be able to not only work buckles or things on your life jacket, you're not going to be able to use your arms or legs to continue to tread water or swim or get into a raft or help effect your self-rescue. So now that's that 10-minute barrier you have to get past. Now, assuming you've survived that 10 minutes, now you've got about an hour that you have to work on surviving. Over the next hour, your fight is to stay conscious, because the cold is sucking the heat out of your body and you will soon lose consciousness. Even if you're wearing a life jacket, that can cause you to die. How many folks think that wearing a life jacket means they won't drown? Oh, good. This is very good. A lot of people always raise their hands. Of course it's possible to drown wearing a life jacket. How is that, you may ask? Thank you. Thought they'd never ask. Because if you lose consciousness, even while wearing a life jacket, now you can't control the times when your intake port, your pie hole, is open. Wave slosh is over. When you're in an intake stroke, you suck in a load of water, you drown. So losing consciousness even while wearing a life jacket may very well lead to drowning long before hypothermic death, which is when the pilot light goes out from cooling in that infinite heat sink. So average time until death in good conditions in 60-degree water, about 7 hours. But look what it goes down to in just 10 degrees. At 50 degrees, now you're down to about 2.5 hours, and it goes down from there to about an hour and a half in ice water. That's not until loss of consciousness. That's until hypothermic death, until the water has pulled the heat out of your body so much that you are cooled down to the point that your cellular functions cease to exist and life ends. So you don't want to have this happen. By the way, overweight folks have a little more insulation. They will last longer than leaner folks. This is the only time you'll be told that it's beneficial to be overweight. Just saying. By the way, these are all average numbers. Your mileage may vary. And if you wouldn't mind hanging on to questions, I'll handle your questions at the end. Maybe I'll answer it sometime in the course of this. Maybe I won't. And at the end, we'll have a little more time. And if I don't know the answer, I'll make one up. Remember what he told you about my initials. So we're going to try and reduce the probability and the exposure, the likelihood that something will go wrong. How can we do that? Well, is it really necessary to fly over the water? A short detour may not take that much more time, and it completely eliminates the hazard, reducing your risk greatly. So that's something to keep in mind. If you're going to fly over water, fly as high as possible. Extend your glide range. extends your communications reach as well. So avoid flight over water as well if you're not equipped to deal with the hazard, if you're not equipped to survive in it should you wind up in it. Make sure your aircraft is in good condition, which sounds obvious but apparently isn't. Make sure you have enough fuel and that you can use the fuel you're carrying. And it's a good idea to tell somebody that you're going to be doing this flight by either filing a VFR or IFR flight plan, or even better, use the Lake Island Reporting Service, or best, flight following, because then somebody is following you on radar as you fly. Does everybody know what Lake Island Reporting Service is? You don't? Wow, somebody ought to tell you about that. We may have a slide. But Lake Island's reporting service, basically flight service holds your radio guard. You call up flight service station, tell them where you are, where you want to go. They're going to ask you to report in with a position report every 10 minutes or so. And then if they don't hear you, they're going to call you. And if you don't answer, they're going to alert the search and rescue system that something bad has happened to you using your last position report as your last known position. It's great service. You pay for it on April 15th, so it's like it's free. And so use that. It's a good thing. If you can't get flight following, Lake Island Reporting Service, next best thing. Now, most sudden engine stoppages aren't because the whirly bits inside break. They're because of what someone described as excess air in the fuel lines. Yeah, I heard that anyway. And people were buying it too. So, oh, he didn't run out of gas, extra air in the fuel lines. That's the problem. So make sure you have enough gas. Make sure you can use all the fuel you're carrying. Make sure it's the right fuel, that you didn't get turbine fuel put into your piston aircraft. And make sure that all your tanks are feeding. Everyone, how many folks have had a fuel selector come off in their hand while you're switching tanks? Gets your attention, doesn't it? Especially if you need to use that tank to get where you're going. So check to make sure that stuff doesn't happen. Lake Island Reporting Service, told you a little about that. That's when the flight service folks hold your radio guard, and you can reduce the severity. So we talked about reducing exposure and probability. Now we want to talk about reducing severity. So if you're going to wind up in this hazardous environment, what can we do to make that more survivable, less severe, have a better outcome? Well, you can have some stuff. You can be equipped to survive. First thing you need is a life jacket. A life jacket, you say. So I'm going to put my life jacket on right now and keep it on because it's raining outside. Rain is manufactured out of water, I understand, and I'm afraid of water. So there we are. Wear your life jacket, and I call them PFDs here, personal flotation device, or PFD, because we're pilots, we like jargon, right? So PFDs, but they're life jackets, and plus PFD takes a lot less space on the slide, so, come on, cut me some slack. Wear it over water. You can't put it on in the air while you're flying the airplane, maintaining control. Does anyone disbelieve that? Good. I can prove it, but we'll take a bunch of time to do that. So have a plan. How are you going to survive? How are you going to egress from your aircraft? And then practice that plan. We'll talk about some ways you can do that. Yeah, you got to wear the plane. The other part about those PFDs, they do you no good if they're in the back of the plane underneath your tow bar and your $100 hamburger wrapper and whatever else you got back there. So got to have that. You got to be prepared. Most ditchings come up by very suddenly. They occur in takeoff, landing, or hover. Well, when some of us do it, it's like a vacuum. It sucks, right? So 92% of ditchings, you have less than a minute warning. 92%. That's most of them. Less than a minute warning. Almost a third of them, less than 15 seconds warning. Less than 15 seconds. That's certainly not something you're going to be able to stop and scratch your head and think about for a little while. You're going to have to act. You're going to have to react quickly and correctly in order to survive that and make a successful ditching. So that's why you want to think about it before you push the noise levers forward. Preventative SAR. SAR, by the way, search and rescue, as we call it in the biz. What can we do to not have to call the search and rescue folks? Well, some of these things we call preventative SAR. Have positional awareness when you're flying over water. Because if you don't know where you are, how are you going to call someone to come get you? I'm over the lake. Okay, let's narrow that down. Which lake? And believe me, there have been people who in a dire circumstance don't know where they are, and that's not good. That does not increase their likelihood of survival. So you have to have accurate position indication. Also, recognize when something's going wrong. Don't be in denial. It's not just a river in Egypt. You need to know what's going on. Remember what I said about 92% less than 1 minute's notice, nearly about a third of them 15 seconds notice. From 500 feet, you got about 30 seconds. So if you're halfway to pattern altitude, when your engine decides to stop cooperating, about 30 seconds before impact in most light airplanes. So when that happens, should that happen, you realize you're going to have to ditch the airplane. First of all, fly the airplane. Get your best glide speed. It's going to give you the most range, the most control. Make a radio call. Mayday, mayday, mayday. Give your position as accurately as possible and the number of people on board. Why do we want to tell the number of people on board? So we know when to stop looking. So that we know we've accounted for everybody. So that everybody gets rescued. Activate your ELT if you can. You might have a little switch on your panel to activate your ELT. Set your transponder to squawk emergency. And aim for any vessels or any land masses that you see. If there's boats out there, vessels, aim for those, try and ditch in front of them so that they will see you and come to your rescue. Initial actions, you want to secure all the loose stuff that's floating around in your cockpit. Get your raft ready. You do have a raft, don't you? We'll talk about why you should. Secure your door or your canopy open. How you do that will depend on your aircraft. There are a number of ways to do it. In some Cessnas, for example, you can open the door, then close the door latching mechanism, and the locking bar comes out to prevent it from coming closed. In a canopy airplane, you could make a little piece of plastic tubing with a slot that you can snap down over the canopy rail to keep the canopy from coming closed. Whatever, you want to make sure that your primary mode of egress, that door, that canopy, whatever, doesn't get jammed closed when you ditch the aircraft should the aircraft fuselage deform a little bit. You don't want that to trap you inside. Also, you want to know what your alternate way of egress is if you have a baggage door or an alternate exit or some other way to get out of the airplane or aircraft, because, you know, helicopters. Anyway, so stow your headset and other loose items. Tighten your restraining gear, your seat belts and straps, and broadcast Mayday all the way down. But most importantly, fly the airplane. Remain under control. Do not stall the airplane. So when ditching, you want to have some idea of what the swells are, the wind and the swells. Turn your fuel off unless, of course, power is still available. And if power is available, use it to give you a little speed margin and control margin above the stall so you can put the airplane on the surface of the water where you want to put it on top of the swell. Leave your landing gear up if you're in a retractable airplane. If you're in a fixed gear airplane, it's okay. You can just leave them down. No problem. Probably doesn't make that much difference, but in retractable, leave it up because, well, again, it probably doesn't make that much difference, but it's leave it up. It also, in retractable gear airplane with the gear down, although it can catch water, it also usually creates additional openings in the gear wells that you don't want to have there because they can cause the airplane to tumble. Tighten your PFDs and your restraints, your life jackets and your restraints. Have the passengers assume brace positions, and above all, do not stall the airplane. Land as slow, under control, but do not stall the airplane. I'm describing a soft field landing, essentially. Do a soft field landing with a certain degree of precision. Now, does everybody know what the brace positions are? Really? Okay, well, stick around. The brace positions, you want to have your feet flat on the deck outside of the crush zone of the seat. So that if the seat were to collapse vertically, when you ditch the airplane, your feet aren't trapped under there. So you want to make sure your feet are flat on the floor, flat on the floor, easy for me to say, and forward of the crush zone. How many folks have two-strap type shoulder harnesses? Okay, great. This is for you. Here's what you do for the brace position. You cross your arms and grab those straps with your thumbs. Grab them as hard as you can, and then tuck your head into the V that's caused by your crossed arms. This will brace your head and prevent hyperextension, help prevent your head from rolling forward and hyperextending your neck. So that's the brace position, and when you do that with your seat belt tight as possible and your seat back as far as possible, it comes out looking something like this, with the belt low on the hips, tight, seat back, your restraints tightened up as far as possible, arms crossed, head tucked in. There you go. There is the brace position, feet forward of the seat crush zone. Now, for those of you who don't have two-strap shoulder harnesses, those who have a diagonal strap like a car in your airplane, well, I'm sorry, this isn't for you. But this is. Here's what you do. Pretty much the deal. You cross your arms, you grab that shoulder strap with the one hand you can, and then your other hand you put over there and grab your shoulder. You don't have a strap, grab your shoulder. Again, that causes you to have a V. You rotate your head down into that V to brace yourself and prevent hyperextension of your neck. All the same other stuff about having your seat and back and your seat straps as tight as possible applies. Again, we'll try and hook up with questions afterwards and comments. The other thing, okay, so if a little bit of speed is available, you want to touch down on the water with some precision, if at all possible. If you don't have power, a little bit more glide speed gives you some options of setting the airplane in the spot where you want it. So a little bit of extra speed is good to have. Not too much. You don't want to have any more deceleration than necessary, but you also want to have a margin above the stall. You don't want to stall the airplane, because if you're stalling, you're not ditching, you're doing something else. What? Crashing. Crashing ain't ditching. You don't want to do that. You want to be ditching and not crashing. So, ditching in calm water, we want to land into the wind. However, if there's any wind, usually that stirs up the water and it's not so calm. So you'll have to kind of, as wind speed increases and as the water surface action increases, you'll want to split the difference and try and be on the top or the back side of any swells. Above all, you want to avoid the face of the swell. And that kind of looks like this. You want to be kind of parallel to the swells like that, or on the back side of the swell like that. But above all, you don't want to be flying into the face of the swell. That would be like flying into a wall of water, and I guarantee that will not work out optimally. So don't do that. Okay, the other thing you want to do as a brace position is to keep your thumbs outside of the yoke of the aircraft, or if it's a stick, keep your thumb outside of the stick. Just hold it with your palm and fingers. Because when your aircraft alights upon the surface of the water, what's going to happen to your flight controls, specifically your elevator? It's going to be pushed up. When elevator goes up, what happens to the flight control? It comes back with great speed, with great violence. And if your thumb is in the way, I guarantee your thumb is not as strong as all the linkage that operates your flight controls. And what do we know about something with a weak link? The weak link is going to break. You don't want your thumb to be the weak link. It's going to break. Number one, it's going to hurt like crazy. Number two, you may want to use that thumb a little later in the rescue sequence. Folks, remember, opposable thumbs are pretty much the only thing that separate us from cats. Just saying that. So you don't want to break your thumb. Keep your thumb outside of the yoke. Okay. Brace for impact, thumb outside the yoke. Touch down at the lowest speed possible, consistent with maintaining control of the airplane. A soft field landing technique, which you could practice. Those of you who are pilots in here, have you ever made a soft field landing? Ever practiced one? Yes, of course you have. That's something every private pilot learns how to do. Now, how many of you go out and practice them for real other than maybe your flight review? It's a good thing to practice. It's a good skill to have. Use any power that may be available. Once you touch down upon the water, you may or may not be upright. The existing data points suggest about a 50-50 chance. So let's assume, for the sake of discussion, that you're going to be inverted. It's going to be dark. You're going to be scared because after how many, unless you're one of the few people in this room, and I know there are at least two who have ditched an airplane before, you're going to be scared. Am I right? So yeah, let's assume for the moment they'll be upside down, scared. Don't panic. Fight off panic. Keep your shoes on. If you're not upside down and it's not dark, hey, your day is getting better already, isn't it? All right. So let's get out of the airplane. How do we do that? Establish and hold a reference point. What is a reference point, you may ask? I'm glad you asked because it's an important thing. A reference point is something you can grab a hold to of the airplane without looking, without having your eyes open. Something you can grab. It might be your seat. It might be the instrument panel. It might be a piece of structural part of the airplane, whatever. It's going to be different for your airplane. Something you can grab a hold of and know how to go hand over hand over hand over hand over hand to get your way to the egress point, to the door of the airplane without looking. That's what a reference point is. And you got to figure out what it is in your airplane. Keep your feet on the deck. Keep your feet on the deck to remain oriented to the airplane. Now, if you're upside down, that's very disorienting. Plus, the hole in the airplane upside down in the water thing is going to be pretty disorienting as well. So keep your feet on the deck to help remain oriented. Most people have some slight positive buoyancy, even without a PFD, that will help hold you in the seat. Hold on to the airplane. Do not release the restraints until all motion is stopped. Remember what was on your right when you were sitting upright. Now that you're upside down is still where? On your right. If you are still attached to the airplane, what was on your right when you were upright is on your right even when you're upside down. It's very disoriented, so keep that, and keeping your feet on the deck will help keep you in relation to the airplane. And that's why you want a reference point. Above all, you do not want to separate from the aircraft if you're in water, a fluid medium, because you might move one way and the aircraft might move another way, and if you're not connected to that aircraft, you don't know where you are in that spatial environment anymore. That is the ultimate spatial disorientation. You don't want that to happen because now you can't find your way out. Remember, it's dark and you can't see. So don't let go of your restraints until you've grabbed that reference point and all the motion is stopped. So you want to open your doors, your windows, wait for the motion to stop, take a deep breath before your intake is underwater. Count a couple of seconds to make sure there's no lurching. Then, while holding onto the aircraft, release your harness. Use a hand-over-hand method to always remain in contact with the aircraft while you get out, keeping your feet on the deck. And it's really not difficult. You don't have to take a big cartoon breath. You can just... I did that on one breath. I didn't even turn blue. I didn't take a big cartoon breath and swell up. So you can do that. And I'll bet your airplane's not that wide. So it sounds like that's quite an obstacle, but it's really not. And having done ditching drills many times, you can do that. You'll surprise yourself. But think about it ahead of time. Be prepared. So don't inflate your life jacket until you're clear of the airplane. Why? Couple of reasons. This gets big when it's inflated. You might not be able to fit through the hole in the airplane when it's all inflated. If you do try to go out with it inflated, you may tear it, damaging it, making it, well, not so buoyant anymore. And the other thing is, most importantly, you may need to go down before you go up. And if it's positively buoyant, you might not be able to get down and get out of the aircraft, and you might be trapped in it. So you don't want that to happen. So now that you're out of the aircraft, you want to get to the surface of the water. Now this seems flip, but if you're disoriented, breathe out a little bit, follow the bubble to the surface. They always go up. And that's not being facetious. It's easy to get disoriented underwater, especially with lousy lighting conditions or poor light. It really can be very disorienting. It's an old diver's trick. If you get spun around underwater, blow out, follow the bubble up. So then get clear of the aircraft. Don't inflate your life jacket or your raft until you know you're clear of the aircraft. You don't want to get trapped underneath it. Secure your raft to yourself and not to the aircraft. Yes, I know, your raft has this little lanyard that says secure to the aircraft. Well, that's great if your aircraft is floating and you're going to get out of the aircraft into the raft. You want it secured to the aircraft so it doesn't blow away. But if you take the raft out with you, secure it to you, not to the aircraft, so it doesn't blow away from you. At this point, you don't care as much about the aircraft. So you may have less than a minute before the aircraft is submerged. Maybe more, maybe less. Your mileage may vary. But you need to get yourself and anyone else who is with you out of the aircraft quickly, and any other survival equipment you need. By the way, this is yet another good reason to only fly with people you like. Just saying. Whoops, I killed it. There we go. Push the wrong button. So you got to remain afloat. Most important part of remaining afloat is having some sort of a life jacket. Remember, that helps you get past that initial panic. That helps you stay afloat once you encounter swim failure if you haven't gotten out of the water by now. So a life jacket is important. Now that we're afloat, we got to get out of the water. Having an immersion suit is great. A dry suit, or what they call a Gumby suit, an immersion suit, terrific. But it's even better to get out of the water into something like, a raft or a rescue vessel. And you need to get help. You need to signal your position so that search and rescue folks can come find you. Now, these techniques that I've discussed work even with large airplanes. Captain Sullenberger was prepared. He recognized that things were going bad. Remember, his mishaps started occurring about a minute after takeoff. Now, he had a little more altitude than we might in a smaller, less powerful airplane, but all things in comparison, it wasn't very high. He didn't have much time. He realized he wasn't in denial, so he wound up in De Hudson. Hey, they think about what you paid to get in here. Come on, this is not... He was aware of his position and his performance. He knew he couldn't make the airport. Yes, I know that after 14 attempts in the simulator, they barely made it, but he knew realistically that wasn't going to work. So he was decisive. He was in control of the aircraft. He made a soft field landing, or whatever the closest equivalent is, in an Airbus. And he was lucky. There's no denying that he had some things that were outside of his scope of control working in his behalf that day. He had smooth water. He had a quick rescue response. Rescue responders who had trained recently in responding to just such a situation, so they were ready to be effective in a SAR response. He had favorable weather, and it was daylight lighting conditions. It didn't happen at night. Had all that stuff happened in a completely different environment, it may have turned out much different. So there are some things that will happen that are beyond our scope of control. So the lesson is to control all the things we can control so that we're better prepared when we have to face those things we can't control. So you can be prepared, and you can be just like Captain Sullenberger should something like that happen to you. And I sincerely hope it won't. So there are some tools you can have to mitigate the effects of being in the water. We'll talk about some of them. Some of the life jackets. So I've got this fine product on. This is one kind of life jacket. The one that's pictured there, at LSI jackets, that's the kind Coast Guard uses all the time. One of the kinds. We use a few. It has storage pouches for gear, this has got a laser. I don't know. There we go. It's got storage pouches for our survival gear. It's a terrific product. It's got a mesh back, so it's relatively comfortable in hot weather. It's expensive. No denying that. It's expensive. It has to be inspected every once in a while, but it's designed for wear day after day after day. It's very rugged and a very good product. Other companies make a very similar one. Switlick is the other big company that makes a constant wear vest. Very good product. Now, you're probably not going to go out and buy one of those for flying across the lake every couple times a year. If you're doing it every day, I suggest that. But if you're just doing it every once in a while, you might want something else, like this suspenders type vest that's pictured. I'm wearing one like this. As you can see, it's quite comfortable. It's not big and bulky. It's not going to be hot. It doesn't have a back. It's a terrific product. You pull the little thing and it blows up and it makes you float. That's what you want. You can buy these at many outdoor outfitting type shops, at boating stores. One word of caution, they come in two flavors: manually controllable and automatically inflatable. In an airplane, you do not want automatically inflatable. Now, most of the automatically inflatable vests, you can defeat or turn off that automatically inflatable feature by one way or the other. They vary in how you do it. It's selectable, or you just take out the little automatic inflator pill, and they all are manual inflatable, although frankly it's not very polite. It says here, jerk to inflate. I think that's rude, but what can I say? And then there are these other kind of life jackets. These single cell yellow ones are sometimes called airline vests. For those of you who've flown on airliners, they tell you, use your seat cushion. Yeah, good luck with that. But if the airplane is going to fly over water a little more than casually, they have to give you a life vest. And this is, if you dip underneath your seat or where they store it, it's going to be something that looks like this, unless you are in seat 13B on Delta Flight 4370. That's just between us, right? Okay, so that's a very quick. Or there are these things that are sometimes called helicopter vests or quick donning vests. I demonstrate it, but I've already got one on. This goes around you with a. Sometimes if you take sightseeing tours in helicopters, they give you a vest like this. This straps around you. It's in a pouch that's coming undone here that sits in front of you. This pouch sits on your lap. You just pull this. The vest comes out like that. You put it over your head. And now you've got, actually this is a 2-cell as opposed to a 1-cell vest. This is a very good device as well. These are easy to carry, easy to wear, and so that's another option if you're going to go flying. I got the fact, pardon? No, this has one of these jerk to inflate things on it, and what you do is you just pull it like that. Which brings up a good point. Sometimes you might jerk to inflate and nothing happens. So what do you do then? Well, they all vests do have a manual inflator, and you just blow into that and that inflates it up, and it's a one-step valve. So you always can inflate your vest manually if the jerk to inflate thing doesn't work correctly, which sometimes it doesn't. So cold water is a big hazard. So now you've survived the ditching, you've gotten out of the aircraft, and you're afloat, and maybe you've gotten out, you're into your little. Now we're going to talk about rafts. How do you stop that heat loss to the infinite heat sink in which you find yourself? The clock. Remember, the clock's running on the rest of your life, which is measured by 1 minute, by 10 minutes, and then by 1 hour. So you have to figure out how to stop that heat loss. Remember these survival times. This is serious business, and you have to have your wits about you and think quickly and be prepared for this to get past that 1-10-1 thing. So we talked about this, the loss of consciousness and what's coming along. This is important stuff, which is much like in checklists. Important stuff is repeated. And that's why I mentioned this again, because this is the important stuff you have to think about. You have to get past that 1-minute shock, gasp, incapacitation. Then you have to get past loss of consciousness. And then you want to get past that long-term hypothermic heat loss to the water. How do we do that? By getting out of the water. So We got to have the will to live. We have to have flotation to remain near the top part of the water, the interface between the water and the air, as opposed to the bottom part of the water. And we have to have some heat retention, either adequate clothing or, better yet, getting out of the water. So there are some stay rules for water survival. These are well known. You might have learned these in the Scouts even. Stay afloat, stay dry, stay still, stay warm, and stay with whatever brought you to the situation you find yourself in. Well, stay afloat's kind of obvious. You have to breathe to prevent drowning, and you can do that a lot better if you're on top of the water instead of underneath it. So you need to have some flotation. A life jacket is the most important tool you can have for that. Now, yes, it is possible to stay afloat without a life jacket. You can use air that's trapped in clothing. You can cling to floating debris, but a life jacket is a really, really, really good tool. The name says it all. It's a life jacket, not just a jacket. Stay dry, to get out of the water as soon as possible, or at least get the main heat loss areas out of the water as soon as possible. Get your head out of the water as soon as possible. Having your head in the water increases heat loss by about 80%. Remember, your brain is in your head. Your body is going to fight desperately to keep that alive at all costs. So it's going to stop the heat, the blood flow to the rest of your body in order to preserve brain function. A dry suit's good, not as good as getting out of the water altogether. Stay still. And this means not treading water. This means not swimming. It means being motionless. Remember, if you're surrendering your body heat to the water, well, what does that mean? It means you're heating up this little bubble of water around you. The more you thrash, the more you're pushing that warm water that you paid for with your precious body heat away from you, and you're bringing nice, fresh, cool water toward you to be heated up by your body. So you want to keep that bubble of warm water around you as much as possible. Staying still decreases heat loss by about 30% over trying to swim or tread water, and this is about impossible to do, again, without a life jacket. You want to keep the main heat loss areas of your body as warm as possible. Your head, your neck, your groin, the sides of your chest, your core. Keep this stuff warm as possible. That's why you want to keep on all the clothes that you were wearing when you got out of the aircraft, and put more on. If you have a jacket, put that on. If you got a coat, put that on. Keep everything on to keep warm. A lovely hat is a good thing. In fact, I'm going to tell you a little later why this is a good thing to have with you in your survival gear, because it keeps you warm and it makes you more visible. If getting out of the water is impossible, use the huddle, the human carpet, or human chain formations to help prevent heat loss. Now, you may be wondering, what are these? And by golly, I'm going to show you. The HELP, or heat escape lessening posture, is basically tucking yourself up into a ball so that you present as small amount of surface area to the infinite heat sink as possible. You're going to trap water near you. This is almost impossible to do without a life jacket on, because you'll tend to turn turtle with your face underwater. If you try it next time you go swimming, you're going to turn over like that. If you have a life jacket on, then you can do that. Tuck your feet up, turn yourself into a ball. The heat escape lessening posture. The next thing you can do is a huddle, which is basically a group hug. Everybody get together. I used to demonstrate this, but I started getting in trouble. So what can I say? It's a group hug. You just huddle together and you trap the warm air between your bodies, and you share heat with the other people you're flying with. This, by the way, is another good reason to only fly with people you like. The human chain and human carpet. Both of these are formations in which you're going to have somebody else's leg underneath your arm. You're either going to be looking at them, or they're going to be looking at the back of your head, and you're going to be looking at somebody else, the back of somebody else's head. So here we have, this person has this person's legs under their arm and so forth, so that they're a chain. Here, each person is opposite, so that this person's leg is under this person's arm, and they're looking at each other. These formations are useful in certain circumstances. The human chain makes you into a high aspect ratio vessel, which is good for moving through the water. That's good for getting away from where you are and moving to another place. Now, why would you want to do that? Well, perhaps there's some hazmat in the water you want to get away from. You know, some sort of nasty polluting chemicals that could burn you or cause problems, like, you know, maybe the stuff you brought to the surface of the water when your aircraft ditched. Or maybe you want to get to a rescue vessel or some land or some other floating debris that you can get on. So there may be reasons you want to be in that chain and move. The human carpet is another useful formation. It's very visible from the air, and maybe on that carpet you can rest someone who needs aid. So there's a use for that. So the other stay rule is stay with whatever brought you to the water. And yes, these rules work for those of you who operate on those floaty things. Stay with whatever brought you there. It's a much bigger target. It may be possible to get out of the water and on top of it, even for a few minutes, because minutes count, and swimming may not help you. It probably won't help you unless there's something nearby to swim to, because that increases heat loss. So a life raft is a good tool to have. Here's a picture of a raft, the kind that we use, and the Coast Guard uses these one-man yachts. They also have a cover that pulls over the top to keep waves from sloshing into them. These can be folded up into a relatively small package, just a little bit bigger than a football, sort of a cylinder about the size of a football. You can also get these things in a back cushion pack, so you can strap it to you and it goes right out of the aircraft with you. Then there are big rafts, small rafts. There's all sorts of them. There's probably folks here at the show selling rafts. You look at them, you figure out what's good for you. But it's important, whatever raft you buy, make sure you can get it out of your airplane through the smallest opening that you can get out of. Make sure you can't just get it in and out through the door. What if you have to go out through an emergency exit, a window, or your baggage door? Make sure you can get it out through that opening as well. An aviation dry suit coverall, or ADC. Not only is it a dashing fashion statement, it has to be worn with very special undergarments, thermally protective undergarments. They require some training to know how to use. They're quite expensive. The neck seals and wrist seals need maintenance and sometimes replacement. You need in-water training with them so that you know how to manage the air that's trapped in them. Imagine if there's air trapped in it and somehow it winds up in the feet, which are sealed, you could wind up floating upside down. That would not be conducive to long life and happiness. So a number of things. The best thing is to get out of the water into a raft. So now that you're floating around in your little boat, what do? Well, assess your situation. Is everybody accounted for? Did you get everybody out of the airplane? Is everyone breathing? Is anyone bleeding? What do you have with you to help signal other aircraft? Is there anyone around? How can you attract attention? This is one of those times where you don't want to be an introvert. You want to attract attention so they can come help you. And a lot of people ask about this time, how long is it going to take to be rescued? And the answer is easy. It depends. It depends on what you did ahead of time to affect your rescue. So does anybody know you're in trouble? Did you send a mayday? Were you in communication with anybody? Did you give position indication? Do you have an ELT or a PLB? An emergency locator transmitter or a personal locating beacon? Did it turn on? Because if nobody knows you're out there, it's going to be a while, isn't it? Somebody has to know you're there. They have to know where you are. They have to know where you continuously move, and you have to stay alive long enough for someone to get there. Now, if you've been talking to air traffic control and you tell them you're ditching, they are going to immediately alert search and rescue authorities. They are going to give them your last known position, which will greatly aid in the planning of the search. Accurate position information greatly helps search and rescue folks, because then they know where to go to get you. By the way, a 406 beacon, an ELT or PLB greatly helps because it gives continuous accurate position information. If you're waiting for your flight plan to expire and thinking that's going to help you, you might want a different plan. Think about it. If you're going on a 3-hour flight and you put down on your flight plan it's going to take you 3 hours and you have trouble 30 minutes into your flight, it's going to be another couple and a half hours before anybody notices you're not where you're supposed to be when you're supposed to be there. Then they're going to give you about a half an hour to get all out of the airplane and parked and get in and call to cancel your flight plan. Only after all that will they start doing some preliminary communications check. They're going to call you on the phone number you put on your flight plan. Did you land all right? Anybody ever have that happen? You forget to close the flight plan? Yeah, me too. No big deal. So don't let that stop you. Don't let the fear of that stop you from filing a flight plan. So then they're going to call, and if they don't find you, then they call the airport that you were supposed to land at. And if you're not there, then they call some of the airports along the route. And then they're going to call some of the airports in the range of the aircraft based on the amount of fuel that you said you were going to have. All that takes time. And it's not until all of those things have been exhausted that it will go to search and rescue authorities for them to start planning a search. And now the search area that has to be searched is the entire range of your aircraft based on the amount of fuel you're carrying. That's a huge search area, and it all has to be searched. What's the likelihood of them finding you right away? Not very good. So this is what's probably going to lead to you being recovered rather than rescued. Remember, that's not the outcome we want. We want to rescue. So the little math here, I hate to get into math because I don't understand it myself, but the less location information, that equals a larger search area. The larger search area we have, the longer the time to locate. The longer the time to locate, the greater the likelihood of a bad outcome. You can change these odds. You can build your own good luck into the equation by having prompt notification, accurate position information. All of that drives quicker location, which means the better likelihood of a good outcome, a rescue rather than a recovery. So, how many folks still have a 121.5 emergency locator transmitter in your airplane? Okay. You realize, of course, that it is allowing you to meet a regulatory requirement, period. It does you no good whatsoever for pretty much anything else other than being ballast. They have an extremely high false alarm rate. When a 121.5 beacon goes on, people shrug their shoulders and go, meh, because most 121.5 beacons are false alarms. Even pizza ovens can cause a 121.5 beacon alert. So SAR forces will not launch on a 121.5 beacon. There has to be correlation. They won't launch on an uncorrelated 121.5 beacon. There has to be something else saying, yes, there is an emergency, some sort of distress, a flare sighting, someone calling in something missing, an ATC notification, something else to correlate that 121.5 before search units will be launched. However, a 406 beacon will launch search and rescue authorities. Does not have to be correlated because each beacon is personally identifiable and much faster, much more accurate response. The other part of that is 121.5 beacon has a very large initial search area and the 406 has a much smaller search area. With GPS, it's even smaller still. So here's how it works. You have your beacon goes off either from a boat or from your aircraft or from a personal locator beacon from someone hiking. That signal is picked up by satellites in orbit, in outer space, around the Earth. Virtually every inch of this planet is within range of a 406 beacon. And then those signals are transmitted to a local user terminal. They were going to call them satellite local user terminals until they figured out what the acronym would be. And then that goes to a rescue coordination center, and search and rescue folks spool up and come out and start looking. 406 beacons take the search out of search and rescue. There's a lot of differences between a 406 and a 121.5. If you have not made the switch to 406, I encourage you to do so. Global satellite coverage. There is no satellite coverage of a 121 beacon. Oh, but airliners listen overhead. Yeah, maybe they do, maybe they don't. Sometimes they do. And even if they do, there's no location information. And from an aircraft flying at 36,000 feet, you could be anywhere in a chunk anywhere in the Midwest practically with a 121.5 beacon, and they can't narrow that down very easily. So they give very little location information, a very high false alarm rate. They will not launch. And there's an initial 450 square mile search area on a 121.5 beacon, whereas with a GPS-equipped 406 beacon, it's about 100 yards square. In which would you rather be? So here's the initial search area of a 121.5 beacon, that bounded by that yellow box there. Here's the initial search area of a 406 beacon without GPS. And here's the initial search area of a 406 beacon with GPS. Oh, not all this here. No. Just this little thing right here. Let's zoom in on that and see what that is. That's right. Hey, look at it. It's this building and part of the building next door and the ramp around it. That's the initial search area of a 406 beacon with GPS. So that's why you want a 406 beacon with localization information in it. It takes the search out of search and rescue. So remember those risks we talked about, surviving in the environment. Well, you've got to deal with that with some of these things hopefully you'll learn, and some of these tools you can use. But distress alerting, position indicating, and active signaling, these are all things a 406 beacon can do. I have, by the way, a number of them up here you're welcome to take a look at. And I would note these are not real beacons. These are just dummy beacons with the guts removed. So don't take one and think, hey, I got me a 406 beacon. This is the world's largest collection of non-functional 406 beacons. The difference in cost, well, it's coming down. It's coming down. You can pretty much buy a 406 beacon for the same price as a 121.5 beacon. Heck, you can buy a 406 beacon for about the price of replacing the batteries of some old 121.5 beacons. So why wouldn't you make the switch to 406? Believe me, if you're floating around in your little raft, or if you're floating around in the cold, wanting someone to rescue you, that price difference will no longer exist. You will be wishing you spent whatever it takes, because remember we talked about the rest of your life being measured in minutes. How are you going to spend all that money you saved if you don't live to spend it? Think about it that way. So the obvious difference between 406 and 121.5 beacons makes the Coast Guard remind you to make the switch to 406. So how long is it going to take to get rescued? Well, unless your Mayday call was heard, unless you got a 406 beacon, it might be a long time. And then we still have to plan a search and actually travel to the search area and then search that area, which may be large if we don't have accurate position indication. So all of that drives the time up. And remember, time keeps on ticking, ticking, ticking into the future, as that great prophet Steve Miller taught us. And this is why getting out of the cold water is a big deal and why you want to stop that heat loss. So what are the odds of you surviving? Well, oddly enough, they are pretty good. If you ditch the aircraft and survive in the water, you've got a pretty good chance of being rescued and not recovered. But you have to take care of the things you can take care of. Accurate position, first of all, notifying the search and rescue system, accurate position information, updating your position, and staying alive long enough for someone to get you. So let's talk about some signaling devices. Hey, here's one, a mirror. Anybody know how to operate a mirror? Yeah, you use it to reflect light like the sun at what's coming along. And the fancy sight that you can use is right here. You hold up your fingers. Hey, there's an airplane. I'm going to hold up my fingers, look at the airplane, and I'm going to work this mirror till I see the sun flashing across my fingers. And that means it's also flashing out there toward the airplane or the boat or whatever it is I want to signal. Another expensive tool that you can use is a whistle. Whistle, a stupid little whistle like this can save your life. Do not denigrate this whistle. There was a case very recently that I read of a guy in the Chicago-Mackinac yacht race who in a storm at night did not have his life jacket fastened correctly, did not have his harness to stay on the boat attached to the boat, and he got knocked through the stay lines into the water. Fortunately, he did get his life jacket attached and inflated, and he had a whistle. He had a strobe light that didn't work very well. It was night. It took his boat about 1.5 miles, douse the sails and get back around coming toward him, but then they couldn't find him. He kept blowing his whistle. It's the only thing he had that worked. He kept blowing his whistle, blowing his whistle. As the boat motored toward him, they'd stop and listen and then go toward his whistle, and then stop, listen, and then go toward his whistle, and they recovered him. He was not in great shape. He was extremely cold, but they recovered him because of his whistle. So a whistle can save your life. Pack one with you. Flares are great things to have, but those are pyrotechnic devices. You got to be careful with them. Make sure they're not out of date, and be careful if you deploy a flare from a raft so that you don't, burn your raft down. Your ELT or PLB, there's all sorts of, they come in all shapes, all sizes. You pays you money. You takes your choice. You know what? I'll bet I haven't gone through any of the exhibit buildings yet, but I'll bet there are people here selling them. There are every year. So go look at them. People ask me, well, which is the best? Well, I can't recommend one over the other, but what I can tell you is they are all good. All of them have to meet the minimum specifications of the cost-pass SARSAT system. They are all good. Some may have other features you want. Some may be at a different price point. So you look at them, you pays your money or takes your choice, but they're all good. Have one, please. Something to make yourself conspicuous on the water, a dye pack, or what's called a sea rescue device, which is this thing right here, which is I've got a picture of it coming up. This unfurls on the surface of the water, and it's a big orange streamer that makes you conspicuous, and this does not disperse in the action of the water. A strobe light, we talked about strobe lights a little bit, something that flashes to make you very conspicuous at night. Make sure, if you have a strobe light, that it works. Make sure the batteries are good, that the contacts are clean, so that when you need it, it actually works. Even a cell phone, actually an aviation radio, a waterproof aviation radio is a great thing. A cell phone may or may not be useful. First of all, it has to stay dry, but most importantly, it has to be able to get reception from a cell tower. Now, one thing you may notice about flying over lakes, there aren't a lot of cell towers out there. If you ditch near a coastal area, in a river, in a small inland lake, you might get cell reception, you might not. Please don't depend on a cell phone to be a search and rescue device. Also, you have to be able to call somebody to be able to make that cell phone be of any use to you. You can't just push a button and have it automatically go off and transmit your position. This is what the sea rescue streamer looks like when it's on the surface of the water. Very conspicuous. We talked about emergency locator transmitters, but I also recommend having a personal locator beacon, because if the aircraft sinks with that emergency locator transmitter, it's not going to continue active signaling. It will, on its very first burst of information, give localization information. And that's a whole lot better than nothing. But continuous signaling, as you may drift about, can be accomplished by a personal locator beacon, something about that size. We talked about mirrors and whistles. These are not expensive. They do not require batteries or a lot of skilled use. And there's people out there selling them at the show. Please pick one of these things up. Strobe lights, talked about, make sure you have one, make sure it works. And then you need something to put all this in. Now, you can buy one that has a rescue company's logo on it, or you can go to your favorite cheap merchandise store and get something like this. This was made for a camera, and it's got a strap on the back so you can attach it. So if you put your signaling gear in this and attach it to your life jacket like this, hey, now you've got a system, and it can go out of the airplane with you. You've got your life jacket, you've got your signaling gear, your personal locator beacon, your mirror, your sea rescue device, and stuff like that. Now you're getting there. And it's important to have a plan. Think about it. Actors practice what they're going to do. They have rehearsals. Athletes have practice for what they're going to do. They have practice before they have a big game. Well, isn't your life more important than a play or a game? So why wouldn't you practice some of your survival skills as well? And you can practice some of them. You can practice soft field landings. You can practice getting in and out of the airplane. When it's a crummy day and you can't go flying, get everybody in your crew down there, get strapped in, pretend you're flying the airplane, have somebody as an umpire blow the whistle and say, ditching, ditching, ditching. And then how long does it take for you to do the things you need to do, stowing your equipment, tightening your gear, getting the brace position, doing all the stuff, sending a mayday call off, doing all the stuff that you need to do in your airplane to be able to ditch the airplane. And then, once you're on the surface of the water, have them blow the whistle again, put blindfolds on. How long is it going to take to get out? This is the time to learn, oh, gee, we have to move these seats back and these seats forward for everybody to get out the door. Oh, yeah, I got to take my headset off and stow it so I'm not constrained by it when I'm getting out. These are the times to figure all that stuff out. You can practice all this stuff on the ground so that you know how to do all this stuff, so that your crew is all ready to do all this stuff before you get out. And how to use all your survival gear. Get it out, look at it, think about it. How do I turn this PLB machine on anyway? Which button does what? What does it mean when it says jerk to inflate? Are they talking about me personally? How do they know? So this is the time to look at that stuff. Practice your plan. Think about stuff you can add to your personal safety gear, like a big orange hat. This keeps your head warm, keeps heat. Unless you have a luxurious mane of hair like I do, it's going to help keep your head warm. And what else is it going to do? It's going to make you conspicuous, because this is a lot easier than looking for this that looks like a cantaloupe. Now we've got something that's, well, an orange cantaloupe. It's a lot easier to find this than it is without. A big orange trash bag, like this. This is the time of the presentation when I get trashed. Something like this. You crawl into this and it traps a layer of water next to you, which is yet another boundary, keeping that warm water that you've warmed up in here from flushing away excuse me, to the rest of the water. You can practice estimating wind speed and swells on the surface of the water. When you know what the wind speed is, observe the water, and you'll start to be able to correlate that, so that now if you're out and you don't know what the wind speed is, ooh, I see what the water's like, I see where the swells are. How would I ditch if I had to ditch the airplane right now? Remember, you have to plan to avoid mishaps. Safety isn't a product. This stuff here isn't safety. The stuff they're selling in the exhibit buildings, that's not safety. Safety is something you should pack with you before every flight. It's something that you pack between the headphones. It's something that you should pack on every flight. Avoid long flights over water if you're not prepared to wind up in that water. Check your aircraft, check your survival gear, check your planning, and check yourself. Are you ready for this? Are you prepared for this? Are you properly planned? Check your fuel quantity and quality. Make sure it's not contaminated. Make sure you have enough. After checking weather again, make sure you still have enough. Gee, those headwinds are pretty stiff. Yeah, make sure you have enough fuel to get where you're going with adequate reserves. Remember to plan your flight and fly your plan. How many folks have heard that? All flight instructors are sworn to repeat that until you're very annoyed. But it's true. You plan on that, because nobody plans to have something goes wrong. But things go wrong frequently from lack of planning. And the best way to fight against that is to plan on it happening to you. We don't want this to be the way you get your first helicopter ride. So thanks for listening, folks. If there's time for any questions, I'll answer them. Yes, sir.
Stand by.
We're going to get the microphone to you so everybody can hear your question.
And please don't leave if you can avoid it for a moment.
Okay, brace position. You didn't take into account some of the newer aircraft that have airbags in the seat belts. Would you still hold on to it?
Well, that's going to, again, this depends on your aircraft. And it depends on what they tell you about grabbing the airbag in your seat belt. How many people have airbags in their seat belts? In the seat belts of your airplane. Awesome, that's great. Well, then you need to figure out what works in your airplane. Yes, sir.
So the other situation is if you're going to be ditching in the water because of something engine malfunction, you got to be prepared for oil slick all over the windshield. You cannot see out front, so you got to plan for that. Keep
Yep,
that in
that's
mind.
right. The mishap that occurs that puts you into the water may be different, so who knows? You may have to be looking out the side. You may have to slip to a landing. Your mileage may vary.
We'll have to cut the questions if you don't mind asking Command or Commodore or Shafer afterward. We really appreciate it. We do have a door prize to give away. Thanks,
door
Bob.
prize. Thank you.
Yes,
Thanks,
unfortunately,
Dad.
it's not
Awesome.
for you.
Thank you, everyone. That's okay.